Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my pleasure to welcome to today's program Mike Glodziak, who is the president at Legacy Supply Chain Services. And today we're going to talk about the right skills and mindset to outsource logistics, which is, I think, is a very interesting topic and question, because when you think about just about every kind of discipline out there, you really need to have a core set of skills to be successful. And so if you kind of think about that in the context of outsourcing and outsourcing logistics or outsourcing any business process, the assumption is that you should have a certain set of skills to be successful at it. So that's part of kind of the concept and the idea that we're going to explore today with Mike. I just want to remind you that our goal here at Talking Logistics is to make this conversational and to involve you, the audience, as part of the conversation. So as Mike and I are, discussing this topic, if you've got a question for Mike or a comment, you can post it via the submit a question button or via the chat feature, and I'll keep an eye on that. And certainly, if we've got, if we've got time and it's a good and relevant question, I'll try to weave it into the conversation. In order to ask a question, just a reminder: if you are joining us as a visitor, you will have to register first or sign up first in order to be able to ask a question. And with that, Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Adrian. Great to see you. Great to see you.
Well, let's before we start and kind of talk about the right skills and mindset to outsource logistics. I always like to ask my guests in terms of how and why they got involved with supply chain and logistics. So, why don't you tell us a little bit briefly about your career path? Again, how and why you got involved with supply chain and logistics, and what's your current role and responsibilities there at Legacy Supply Chain Services?
Thanks, Adrian. Well, I like so many in my generation, I didn't go to school to start in supply chain. That was never the big goal many decades ago when I started this. But I come from an industrial engineering background. That's my schooling, and I spent the first 10 years of my career as an industrial engineer, working for several large companies. At about year 15, I had the chance to join a supply chain operator, and that was a large global player, and really spent 5 years with them. Did some global travel, fell in love with supply chain and outsourcing. So at the end of that 5-year period with them, I had the good fortune to join a consulting company, and that was Tompkins Associates. And Tompkins is a well-recognized supply chain consulting firm that works across the world. And I mean, that was a great perspective if you're going to end up in the supply chain business, because it gave me a chance to get a client's perspective on life and understand the difference between results and deliverables. So, ended my consulting career, and that was about 10 years ago from where we are today, and joined a large publicly traded North American LTL player. And they were in the early startup stage of developing a division that would offer up supply chain outsourcing solutions, and that's why I joined them. And that went great for 9 years. And a year ago now, the decision was made that they would divest themselves of the supply chain division. It was a very successful division. And that's when Legacy came along. So we're relatively new to Legacy. They acquired us in March of 2013. So shortly after the acquisition, Legacy named me president of the newly formed consolidated supply chain group within Legacy. So that's how I got to this point. That's how I found myself in the president's seat for Legacy Supply Chain. Adrian, I'll just jump in again, and I'll give you a quick blurb or a quick plug on who Legacy is. And we are a U.S. Canadian supply chain operator. We operate in over 50 locations across North America. We're close to 3,000 employees as of today. We have dedicated facilities. We have multi-client facilities that operate with multiple clients under a single roof. We have a domestic brokerage service offering that includes LTL, includes truckload, includes intermodal. And we also have a international brokerage offering. So we have clients clients are looking to ship their ocean containers from offshore into the US or into Canada. And then in addition, that international group is supported by a customs compliance group. So great suite of services. The verticals we operate in here in North America, not all the verticals, but our primary verticals include retail, they include consumer goods, and they include industrial. So great company, exciting company, a lot of good stories to tell.
Great background there. I also, started my career as an engineer, working at Motorola and Polaroid. And again, I think it's a common story where a lot of folks, our generation and older, really get into supply chain, almost by accident or, through a different career path, where, I think next generation, current generation of supply chain professionals are really, have the opportunity to kind of study supply chain at the university level. So let's kind of focus on the topic now. Obviously, in your role, you get to speak with a lot of customers, as well as companies that are looking to outsource, all or part of their logistics operations. What are the main driving forces, that are leading companies to outsource today? And are those driving forces the same or different than they were, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago?
Great question. Let me start out with a little bit of industry statistics. So in this outsourced world in North America, one of the numbers gets thrown around is over the last couple of years, we've seen a year-over-year 5 to 6% growth in our industry. And the industry would tell you as well that for the next couple of years, we'll see that same growth at 5 to 6%. Here in North America, at current, the number that people throw around is we're around $170 billion business for supply chain and 3PL outsourcing, logistics outsourcing. So the message there is that it continues to be something that clients are doing, that organizations are doing, and we continue to see growth in the outsource world. With respect to, have I seen it change a lot in the last 5 to 10 years? Honestly, I don't think there's been a lot of sweeping changes in the industry. It hasn't changed a lot. In our experience and what we see at Legacy, why people outsource, it really comes down to, I would say, 4 main factors. It's going to come down to cost. So, as a provider, we typically have a better cost structure than a lot of our clients. That's why they outsource to us, and that could be a labor cost structure, that could be our bricks and mortar building cost structure, that could be us leveraging our transportation network. But beyond costs, we have a lot of clients that will outsource to us because of flexibility. We just offer a more flexible approach to supply chain. And again, that's our 50 operating sites across North America that provide us some flexibility and provide our clients some flexibility. That's our solid understanding of supply chain as a service provider that also adds flexibility. Number 3, the third reason we'll see a lot of folks outsource in today's environment is really about capital investment. And so many clients out there are looking to redeploy the capital elsewhere in their business. So if you're a retailer, you're looking to deploy that capital on a storefront. If you're a consumer's good or industrial player, you're looking to deploy that capital into your manufacturing processes. So that certainly plays into it. And I would say number 4, with respect to why we're seeing outsourcing out in North America today, it's still service levels. It's leveraging a outsource provider, a supply chain expert to drive and definitely improve service levels. So, has there been a lot of broad, wide sweeping changes in the outsource world in the last 5 to 10 years in North America? Probably not. There's some subtleties I see changing. We see some of our global clients looking for integrated global solutions. So, we're in a nice position that we offer, international brokerage services from Asia into North America, and you can pick up that product at the shores of North America, and you can put it into your warehouses, and you can do last mile delivery. So, maybe a little more interest in integrated global supply chains. We're seeing some regulatory compliance impacts. A great example at hand is we operate very heavily in California, and the new CARB compliance regulations that the state has put in place. And it's the state's effort to get newer equipment on the road and pull the older equipment off the road. Does force some clients into potentially outsourcing their fleet, and we've seen some of that activity in California. We're seeing some service need differentials in the last 5 years. My best example would be e-com. We've recently put a couple e-com pieces of business into our world, and we have so many clients that just aren't comfortable in that e-com fulfillment world, which is very different from anything else you do in the supply chain. And I think the last and final fourth change I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years has been, the emergence of technology needs. So we'll get clients who are trying to improve their warehouse management system or want to improve their transportation management systems. And perhaps they don't want to make that investment into technology, or they don't have the bench strength internally to implement or invest in that technology. So they'll look to outsourcers and say, hey, what have you got from a tier one perspective? And how can we leverage you as an outsource provider to get that technology solution? So that would be my answer there. It's not wide changing, but there is some subtle changes for sure.
No, all great points, and I would echo the e-commerce or more broadly speaking, omni-channel fulfillment, which is definitely in the retail segment, something that a lot of retailers are trying to still figure out and looking for best practices or looking for partners that can help them, achieve what they're trying to achieve there. And I always say that. Your last point there about technology, that from what I hear from a lot of customers, a lot of manufacturers and retailers, is that they're looking to their 3PL partners as a source of technology. And in many ways, something I've been talking about for years is that we're seeing the business models of 3PLs as operations managers converge with consulting and technology, right? And then really a successful 3PL really bundles all those three things together. So I think you kind of touched upon those points in your response there. When I interview companies that haven't outsourced, so you've kind of given a lot of good reasons and a lot of the driving forces that companies ultimately decide to outsource. But obviously, there's a lot of companies out there that still manage it in-house. And in a few cases, I've talked to companies that have actually kind of had been outsourcing and brought it back in-house. And when I ask these companies, what's the main reason you don't outsource? The main reason they say is that they want to stay in control, right? So control is kind of the operative word there. So for them, outsourcing implies less control. Is that perception or reality? And can you outsource and still be in control?
Great question. And I'll tell you, Adrian, probably the most common question I get in my role. And, as we're out there talking with potential new clients, they certainly ask that question. That's top of mind for them. And I'll get that question from new clients as well. My answer to that is it's perception. There are so many successful outsourcing solutions and relationships out there. I'm going to tell you it's perception. I think the biggest challenge, or what we try to warn new clients about, is the notion of just because you've outsourced your warehouse facility or perhaps a transportation lane or your complete supply chain, it doesn't mean that you've outsourced responsibility for your supply chain. And you still have responsibility for your supply chain. You still have to understand your supply chain. And absolutely, you still need to have control of your supply chain. And it's a difficult question to answer, but when you're across the table from a potential new client and talk about outsourcing, they're expecting that they're going to cut all their costs, and that's not the case. You still need to keep that in-house expertise. And again, the successful relationships, the ones that we do very, very well in, they still have a lot of in-house supply chain expertise. It's as simple as that. So, someone a lot smarter than me in the world history had the phrase, to measure is to know. And that's the case here, is to measure is to know. And it is about performance measurements. And at the end of the day, it is about metrics. And when we talk to a client, we talk about metrics at three different levels. We talk about operational metrics, we talk about tactical metrics, and we talk about strategic metrics. Some quick examples of those three. Operational metrics for us is really aimed at, our operation as a provider. So if we're talking a dedicated warehouse facility, perhaps, and we're operating that facility, operational metrics for us might include order shipped or order accuracy, but it is about us, the provider, and it's a measure for us day to day on how well we're doing as a provider. When we think about tactical metrics, what we aim our tactical metrics at is the client's business critical measures. So it's really about the client, and for a client, example of a tactical measure may be an order cycle time or a ship cycle time. So it's a time that client gave us an order and we got that order to our shipping dock, or perhaps it's the time that, from the point we ship that order out to our customer's customer receiving that order. So that's the tactical measures, and then really it's about our clients' critical business measures. So the last one, strategic measures, which we love to put in place, and sometimes a little more difficult with our clients, but strategic measures are really aimed at measuring our clients' and business goals at a higher level. So a couple of examples, is our client profitable at the end of the quarter, or the end of the month, or the end of the year? So are we as supply chain operators delivering what we said we would deliver at the right price and, positively affecting their profitability? Is their sales revenue increasing? So again, you need your client support when you get to that strategic level, and you need to be working together, and they need to share with you. But I think if you put the foundation in place and you put the operational, tactical, and strategic measures well cemented in the foundation, then you don't lose control, and it does work very well. So I think it's more perception than reality, and in the successful relationships, it truly does work.
I like the way you kind of put it in the context of metrics. I think when I talk to companies and I kind of try to peel back the onion a little bit in terms of what they're talking from when they say control, for a lot of them is visibility, right? That's the constant term that you hear a lot, right? And they want to have visibility to what's going on to the supply chain in order to make, quote unquote, smarter and faster, decisions. And I think that's where technology comes into play, and why technology becomes an important part of the equation there. Metrics, as you just talked about, I think becomes another part of the equation. As you were talking and I was thinking about this, it occurred to me that one of the big buzz terms that you hear a lot these days in the 3PL industry specifically, but also more broadly, is this concept of control towers. And I'm wondering in some ways whether that term, or what, and of course you can ask 10 people what control tower means and you'll probably get 10 different answers. But I'm wondering if if that's a response to kind of this raised concern about losing control, is the fact that we're providing a control tower for you where we're working on this together. Your thoughts on that in terms of this control tower idea and conversation?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you make a good point on technology. At the end of the day, it is about technology, and how you automatically push some of those measures out so everybody's comfortable, and the measures are real time. Yeah, there's no doubt about that, Adrian. I mean, that control tower concept, making sure the client feels good about the decision they made to outsource to you, and And in some of these cases, I mean, they have literally handed the keys to the kingdom over to you with those that truly outsource their complete supply chain, and we have some examples of that. So yeah, no, absolutely. And the biggest criticism in the supply chain outsource world here in North America, anyhow, is that we overpromise and underdeliver, and that's so incumbent on us as providers to not overpromise and underdeliver. I mean, that's the trick right now. So yeah, control tower is a new buzzword. It used to be dashboard, but good comment. Good comment.
So when I talk to companies about outsourcing and you read a lot of articles on the whole topic, kind of the rule of thumb or the simple approach is to in terms of determining what do you outsource versus what do you keep in house, is to kind of assemble a strategic team and define what your core competencies are, right? And what they are, what they need to be, and then if something is deemed a core competency, well, that's what we keep in house, and then everything else we kind of outsource, right? Um, is defining core competencies enough? Is there a better approach? What are your thoughts on that?
I tell you, that's a question. That's a super interesting conversation for me. We could talk about that one all day. I don't think it is enough. I'm going to put my twist on this a little bit, but I don't think it is enough. It's if we go back to what I said earlier, outsourcing the decision to outsource is, from where I sit, from my experience out there, is really it's really about one of four things. It's about cost, it's about flexibility, it's about where you're going to allocate your capital to, and potentially it's about improving your service levels. The notion of, and I know this has been going on quite a while now, but the notion of, we're going to outsource that activity that's non-core to us, and we're going to keep the core competency inside. We're going to insource that. We're not going to outsource that. I would really challenge that, and I'll give you a couple of examples. We have the good fortune in Canada of dealing with one of Canada's largest retailers. We have the good fortune in the U.S. Of dealing with one of the U.S.'s largest retailers. If I had a representative from each of those customers online with us here, and I asked them what the core competency is, first and foremost, they would tell me that it's retailing. There's no doubt about that. I think they would also go on to say to us that one of their core competencies is supply chain, and both these companies are incredible, strong supply chain operators. There's no flies on them. They get it. They operate multi-billion-dollar supply chains. So, both of these companies outsource. So we get these larger companies now that would admit to you one of their core competencies is supply chain, but yet they're outsourcing supply chain. So when you ask the question or you talk about do you outsource non-core competencies, probably so, but we also see some customers out there outsourcing their core competencies. So the wrinkle that I want to add to it, and this is our take on it, is that in those two examples, sure, they're great retailers, sure, they're great supply chain operators. Those are absolutely core competencies. But the number three core competency that both of these organizations have is their outsourced core competency. And I think that's a big conversation. I mean, both of these organizations are great at outsourcing. They would tell you that that's a core competency. So that's why they're outsourcing their supply chain. So I know that sounds like a lot of double talk, but it's worth thinking about, and we'll talk about it some more, I'm sure. But those that are good at outsourcing from a client's perspective have an absolute core competency for outsourcing.
Yeah, that is an interesting kind of wrinkle on it, and definitely want to get into that kind of right now. But my just before I ask to kind of explore that a little bit more, My take on the core competencies is that, and certainly this is true, more true today than ever before, is that your core competencies are continuously changing, all right? And I think for a lot of companies, what they decide to outsource today will be different than what they will decide to outsource, tomorrow, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. And it's a continuously dynamic process. So they might be things that they're outsourcing today that they want to, for whatever reason, they may want to bring back in house sometime down the road. But at the same time, things that they may be, passionate about doing in house today, they may decide to outsource down the road. So I think that it's an ongoing, where it used to be a one-way street a lot of the times. Now I think it's a more dynamic, fluid type of decision. I think that puts the onus on the service providers, on the 3PLs, to also be in a position to be able to respond and be able to serve their clients in a variety of different ways, right? So you may be doing, Mike, you may be providing services 5 years from now that you're not even thinking of doing today because your customers might take you there because they're saying, Mike, we want to bring this back in house, but here's an area that we need some help in, and you've got the technology, the people, the assets, so on and so forth, that can help us, and we want to outsource this now to you. So that's kind of my take on it. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, Adrian, absolutely. And I've been in the business long enough now that, we are seeing those life cycles. So we do have customers and examples of customers where, they'll call you up and say, hey, unfortunately, Mike, we're having to pull this particular element of the supply chain you operate for us back in-house for a whole host of reasons. And we don't have enough time to talk about those today, but we see that happening. And 3 or 4 months later, they'll call me back up and say, hey, Mike, I know we took that last piece back, but here's what we're going to outsource next. And, we think that your company can do a great job at it. So we absolutely see that. What I take out of that is, for so many of these customers that are clients that are good at outsourcing, they figured out that first and foremost, it's about culture. It's they're comfortable with the cultural fit that they have with us, with Legacy, and we're their go-to provider, versus, hey, we're going to put an RFQ out there, and hey, we're going to drive this down to pennies. And we're absolutely seeing that shift right now, and the consolidation for many of our bigger customers where they're going to a single provider or perhaps 2 providers in their world. And what you see out of that, and why we invest in those relationships, is yes, one day something can go away from you and go back in-house, or just evaporate. And again, a quarter later, you can get that call that says, hey, this new opportunity is coming at you, Mike. So it's spot on comment, Adrian. That's a great comment.
So let's talk about this outsourcing as a core competency now, which I kind of like the way you phrased it there, because I hadn't really thought about that. And it goes back to, again, the whole title of this episode, right? Having the right skills and then mindset to outsource logistics. And like I said at the beginning, in every discipline, whether it's sports, medical research, cooking, you name it, right? You have to have a core set of skills in order to succeed. So what are, and I think you touched upon them a little bit here already, but what are some of those core skills, core competencies, if you will, that companies need to have to successfully create and manage outsourcing relationships?
Well, I would tell you it really is about the relationship. That's where it starts. That's where the investment is, and everything else kind of falls or hangs off of that relationship you've created between the client and the provider. Number one, there is without a doubt, and maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but without a doubt, there's a life cycle to what we do. And that life cycle may be a quarter life cycle, that may be a half-year life cycle, that may be a full year life cycle, but there's a life cycle. And it's imperative that the client and the provider both understand that life cycle. And that life cycle really starts with understanding. It's to understand one another, to understand the scope of what the client's trying to achieve, is the first step in that life cycle. And then once you get through that understanding piece of it, it's about learning. And, it's the client learning what you as a provider are capable of and the services that you might offer him. And it's us as a provider learning about our client and what makes that client tick and what measures are important to them and what are the tactical and strategic measures and how do you positively affect their business. So there's this understand element to the life cycle, there's the learn element to the life cycle, and then the third piece of that life cycle is adjusting. And how do you take those understandings and how do you take those learnings and how do you adjust back to make that relationship work? So again, that could be a quarterly phenomena, that can be an annual phenomena, but there is an absolute life cycle to the relationship. And if you can figure that out, and again, that's what we do as strong providers is figure that life cycle out. But it's key. So that would be my number one answer to, how do you make this work? What does a client need to be successful in this road? I would say number two, without a doubt, and most clients are getting pretty savvy to this, and they're fairly good at it. Is a relationship manager. So it's that SPOC, as we call it, that single point of contact. I mean, that is so mission critical to what we do. And without that relationship manager on the client side, it's just difficult to manage. When you've got too many people to report to on the client side, and those people have differing opinions and perhaps differing priorities for the day, it becomes very difficult as a provider. So the relationship manager is key. There's no doubt about that. The typical relationship manager is a well-rounded individual. They really have a great understanding of their business. It's beyond supply chain. It's about customer service. It's about their finances. It's about their technology. It's about what makes them tick. I mean, that's a relationship manager's job. They tend to be fairly mature, so they've got the gray hair going on like I do. So they're well along in their careers. They're big picture people. They don't get bogged down in the minutia. I mean, they're big picture people, and for the most part, in our particular world, we see them coming from the supply chain function within the client's world. So, I would say number two, that to make these things work, to be good at this, it's about having a dedicated relationship manager in place. The third thing we do to create success in our relationships is we try to mirror the client. So, we'll take myself as an example. I'm the senior executive in legacy supply chain. I'll try to mirror myself in the client's world. So whether that be the sponsoring executive or whether that be a divisional president or a VP within our client's world, it's incumbent upon me to mirror that relationship. So, our VP of operations will do the same thing with our clients. Our facility managers will do the same thing. So we like to mirror ourselves across the client's organization. And the last thing I'll add in there, and what we see as a differential in creating success and making these things work, is more and more of our clients are allowing us to become more exposed to their business. And what I mean by that is, they may introduce us to one of their market managers, and we'll develop a direct relationship with a market manager. It may be the market manager for the Southwest U.S. or the Northwest U.S., but we'll develop a relationship with that market manager. We'll develop a relationship with their forecasting group. So we have a one-to-one relationship, with the people that are forecasting the business and forecasting their growth over the next quarter or the next couple of years. We'll develop relationships with their technology people so we can get a better sense of where their technology is headed and what inputs that they're looking from our technology, or perhaps if we're operating on their technology, what changes are coming. So, I would say that it's absolutely important, and again, not easy to do. The client's putting a lot of trust in you as a provider to allow you to have those direct relationships with all the functions areas in their world. So it's key, but it certainly does help. So there's there's a lot of science to what we do. There's no doubt about that, but there's also a lot of art to making these relationships work, and that's part of the art right there is developing the relationships within your client's world.
Certainly a mix of art and science. One of the things you said kind of resonated with me because I remember years ago I did some research on this topic in terms of what makes for successful 3PL customer relationships, and it's something that continue to research on, right now. And one of the things that I heard repeatedly from a lot of customers is that that relationship, like you said, the person or the individual that's responsible to interface with the 3PL partner was played such a critical role in the success of the relationship. And in many cases, that person that they put as the point person to manage a relationship, the primary skills or attributes of that person wasn't so much their knowledge or expertise of logistics or supply chain. And in fact, in some cases, the person in charge of that role had very limited experience in supply chain logistics. They had some baseline knowledge, but you wouldn't call them an expert per se. But what they had was good people skills, good communication skills, good listening skills. The ability to really discuss, have good, meaningful conversations with their counterpart at the 3PL. And in fact, I heard over and over again that the biggest mistake you can do is to take someone who's got who's an in-depth expert in transportation or warehousing, has been doing that for 25 years, 30 years, and put them in that role of the relationship manager if they lack all those other skills I just talked about, because at the end of the day, it's less about the in-depth expertise that you have in logistics and more about those. I hate to call them soft skills because it's obviously they're very critical skills, but it's more about that than how much about transportation management or warehouse management that makes that the relationship successful. And I suspect that person will play a role in my next question, which is, obviously there are always bumps in the road, right? So how do you, and you talked about measuring and metrics earlier. So how do you measure how well an outsourcing relationship is going, and what do you do when you hit those bumps in the road, when those expectations aren't being met, on either side?
Yeah, another great question. And let me just go back to the comment you just made on that relationship manager. Part of the role they play, without a doubt, and I think this is the art side of it versus the science side of it, is they really do act like Switzerland at times. I mean, they are that middle piece between the pointy end of the spear that may be coming from the client and ourselves, the provider. So that, you're right, they're very soft skills, as you called it. They have a lot of soft skills. We call that being Switzerland. They're good mediators. They're good understanders of people. So that, you're right, Adrian. That's a great point. But the question on expectations. How do you know when you hit nirvana? How do you know when things are really good with a client? And we are a service provider, so like any service provider in any industry in the world, be it supply chain or something else, there are bumps in the road, and there always will be bumps in the road, and that's what makes this profession very interesting for me. But the way I like to liken it, and the analogy I use is, you've got there. And again, the analogy I look at is, if we look at a conference room, and there's a table in that conference room, and there's 4 client representatives sitting around that table, and there's 4 provider representatives sitting around that table, and we're reviewing the last month or the last quarter, or perhaps it's a planning session. If I could go in there and I could tear the ceiling out of that conference room and look down into that conference room and around that table, and I could quietly observe, and I could visually look at that table and look at the interaction between that group of 8 individuals, you've hit it when you can't disseminate between the client and the provider, when they're truly operating as one, as a soul, operating that supply chain. I mean, that's when you know you've got there. And I know that sounds like a bit of a flippant answer to your question, but we have those relationships. And when you're sitting in that conference room and you're sitting around the table and you have that relationship, you know it. And it does feel very different. And there's no more them and us. You are together the operator of that supply chain. So for me, that's when you know you're hitting out of the park. You've hit a home run. That's absolutely nirvana. The other thing I'll say too is that in real estate they call it location, 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 and we often hear that term. And in our business, in supply chain, we like to call it culture, culture, culture. And to make the expectation piece work, if you have that strong cultural mesh, and I referred to that earlier, again, with so many of our clients, we have that strong cultural mesh. We work together very, very well. But to have that strong culture and to have an open relationship and a transparent relationship and a strong communication plan, and to have that client accept you as one of their own, and we absolutely do have those scenarios. Again, you're hitting it. So that's all the good news. But you're right, Adrian. Occasionally there are some bumps in the road, and we do hit those bumps in the road. So what do you do when expectations aren't being met? I say to our people, I say to our building operators, that people that make this happen for our clients and make this happen for Legacy all day long, I say to them, hey guys, bad news does not get better with age. It just doesn't. So when there's a bump in the road, it's incumbent upon you to pick up that phone and call the client. Don't let it fester. Don't let it sit, because it's just going to make a bad situation worse. So that's, I think that's the first learnings I've had on expectations. But beyond that, we'll review scope together with the client. So, there could be a scope change. There could be a new dimension to the business that we're not realizing. So it is about reviewing scope, and we'll do an expectation review occasionally with a client. So we'll do a quarterly review, and at that quarterly review, we'll ask the client, are we hitting expectations? Where am I off? Where do I have a flat spot in my tire? And 99% of the clients are willing to offer up where we need to pull our socks up. So that's great, and we appreciate those open conversations. But additionally, what we're finding now is that, again, the clients that are very good at outsourcing, have that outsourcing competency, will reverse that question back to us and say, well, hey, Mike, that's great, and here's what you need to do. But if we could ask you the same question, what is it, Mike, that we need to do better to be a better outsourcer, to continue to develop our competency with outsourcing? So we have some really interesting conversations, and when you get the client asking you, what can I do better for you, Mike? You're getting to a good spot, but it certainly helps. I think at the end of the day, as supply chain providers, we all face turbulent waters. That just comes with the territory, and it's how you embrace that. It's how you get through those turbulent waters and get to the other side, to the smooth waters. And I'll tell you this, and it's a phenomenon that I do occasionally see, is to get into turbulent waters with a client because you're not hitting expectations, and to embrace that and to find your way out of that. Typically, what happens through that is your relationship strengthens. It's a chance for you as a provider to show your steel and show what you're made of. And we've been in a couple of tough spots, and we've always got out of it. And it does end up strengthening your relationship. So those not hitting expectations at times can be a good thing, a good test of the relationship.
All good points, Mike, and we're just about out of time here, so I want to quickly ask my last question as a way to kind of wrap up. And like you said, we could probably talk for hours on each of these questions and topics, but briefly, as a way to wrap up, what questions should companies ask themselves to determine if they have, the right skills to create and manage, a successful outsourcing relationship, to assess whether outsourcing is a core competency of theirs.
Right. Again, two quick comments. I mean, one, if you're not going to invest in the relationship, if you're not going to manage the relationship, you're setting yourself up for failure. We talked about that. Number two, I think the secret sauce at the end of the day is to develop that internal competency for outsourcing and to invest in that internal competency. I think to be more specific, the questions I would ask myself if I was a client about to go down that outsourcing path, certainly would be my statement of work and scope. Do I understand that? I would ask myself the question, do I, as the client, really understand my own processes? Can I effectively articulate those processes to the outsource provider? Because if I can't do that, I'm setting that outsource provider up for failure. So I mean, that's an important conversation. Same conversation with the performance measurements, the metrics. Do I understand my tactical measures and what my strategic measures truly are, so I can share that with my provider and get them to do the very best they can for me. And I think that last question I'd ask myself if I was about to go down that path as a client would be, do I have any information gaps, whether that be volume metrics or forecast or growth numbers, or perhaps it's some type of product detail. But if I've got some gaps in my information, I've definitely got to fill those in before I go down that path. I mean, that's just fundamental to the success. So I think at the end of the day, to sum it up, I really believe in that outsourcing core competency, and the clients that are successful have figured that out, and it's it's a great conversation.
Great. Well, I think that's a great exercise for supply chain logistics executives to kind of think about and do over the next few days, is really to think about whether outsourcing is a core competency, and whether they have the skills and the attributes as we discussed today to make it successful. So with that, Mike, we're out of time for today. I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to really start the conversation on this topic, which I think is something that we're going to continue to discuss here at Talking Logistics, as well as 3PL briefings, which is something new that our company has launched recently here, really gets at the core of what we're trying to do there, which is trying to find what are the attributes that help maximize the value and longevity of 3PL customer relationships. And I think we got that conversation started great today. So again, thank you very much for joining us today, Mike.
Thank you, Adrian, and we enjoyed being here. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank all of you that joined us today live as part of this program. If you are watching this on demand and you've got a question for Mike or a comment, find the episode on talkinglogistics.com and post your question or comment there. And I'm sure that Mike would be more than happy to respond and continue the conversation there. So with that, again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.
Thank you.